introducing us? Do you mind introducing yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my name is Eston McKeague, and I'm the president of the Young World Federalists.
Perfect. So can you just give us a brief description of what Young World Federalist is all about?
Sure, yeah. So we're a global youth-led movement and organization, and we fight to give humanity a voice in global affairs and to build support for world federalism. So we believe that the current system of global governance is inadequate to solving global challenges, such as the climate crisis or wars or human rights abuses, and so on and so forth, the very numerous and overlapping crises that we're facing. And the current system of global governance is unable to solve or really properly address these challenges. And so what we advocate for is to reform and transform global governance and really make it democratic and give everybody on Earth a say, a voice in how decisions are made at the global level. Yeah, and so that's pretty much what we stand for. And as an organization, how do we achieve these goals? This very ambitious goal is by building support for these ideas, especially amongst the youth all around the world. So we have several online communities and things like that. So we're online, we're digital, we're available where the young people are. And then we try to start local chapters and local groups around the world, sort of taking things offline and into the streets. And then we also have the Week for World Parliament, which is a big annual event that we're a part of. It's every October, and that's where we do sort of our large in-person events all around the world. Yeah, and so those are like our three major programs, but we do a lot of other stuff, of course, as well. But that's the summary.
Oh, perfect. So straight to my first question. Would you like a world government to have an optimistic or pessimistic attitude towards the future?
Yeah, I would, of course, want the world government or the World Federation or whatever, the global democracy. I would love it to have an optimistic and positive view about the future. Generally, I think that's what's necessary to make any change. If we have a pessimistic and defeatist attitude, then we're already putting up roadblocks in our way, which is unnecessary because there's already so many roadblocks and speed bumps already that are already in place. So to think, oh, well, what's the point? That's just putting more roadblocks in the way. You need to have a positive can-do attitude. And I believe that goes all the way up into how the World Federation should be structured, and the sort of the organizational culture of the World Federation should definitely be one that says that they're able to, or that it is able to address global challenges. And I think we see that with the United Nations. They have a pretty positive outlook on what they can do, maybe a little bit too optimistic. But I think that's the right outlook to have. Now, of course, I don't want to discount how challenging the situation that we find ourselves in is. It's an extremely challenging and an extremely depressing situation. I mean, when you read the news, obviously, I think the natural or inherent reaction is to go, oh, wow, the world is really going through some stuff right now. It doesn't look very good. I often come home and say things like, I really don't think it's going to look good in the next few years. And that might be the case. But that's exactly why we need to have a positive attitude. We need to believe that we can do something about the situation that we're in, and the situation that we're all in as a human species. I believe that's essential to getting anything done.
Yeah, but it's really hard to have a positive outlook given the current circumstances that we're in, especially when you look at climate change. It's affecting everyone, and especially the most vulnerable people. So everyone has something that they should do towards climate change, but most people are not taking action. Most people are just looking at their own interests and not doing anything about climate action. So for you, given a situation where you are given the option of trading your own car for a pass in a multi public transport system, which option would you choose? Would you take the pass, or would you um, retain the car?
I would take the transit pass for sure. But of course, that really depends on how good the system is, the metro or the transit system. It's unfair to say to somebody who lives far away from a station and the train only comes once a week, to say, hey, yeah, you should take the train, because that, if they have to go to work every day and the train doesn't come at the right times, it doesn't make any sense for them. So what we really need is more public transportation, more frequent, more stops, all of that. So we need to invest in it. But my own personal decision has been to sell all my cars. I've owned like 2 cars in my life, and I sold the last one probably over 10 years ago now, and I haven't looked back since. I've been riding a bike and taking public transportation in the United States, where it was extremely difficult, in the Netherlands, where it was a lot easier, and here in Berlin, where it's extremely easy. So I don't need a car at all where I live, and I'm very privileged and thankful and happy about that.
Yeah, that's impressive. So let's go to another topic, which is about language. This is something we discussed in the previous topic. It works best when people have a common culture, a common language, for example, in the States, or like where people have a common language. So if we are to create a successful world federation, that is something that is going to actually come up. What language policy are we going to use? Are we going to have one official language, or are we going to have multiple languages, and people like the official world parliament should be conversant in more than one of those languages? And also, what is the national anthem of this world federation? What language is it going to be in?
Oh man, those are good questions. I mean, first I'll preface everything by saying that I believe that these questions should be answered by a global democracy, by a world parliament, by representatives of the people of Earth, or the people themselves via direct democracy. I by that I mean to say that I don't believe I have the authority to decide these things, nor should any one person. So yeah, but if you want my opinion on how it should go, then I would say, I think we'll always have a strong diversity of languages on Earth, and I think we should celebrate and protect all languages, especially the endangered ones or the dying ones. We need to write them down and record them, and I'm really in favor of strengthening minority languages and things like that. And protecting the diversity of human culture. I believe that the diversity of our species is what makes us so great. So I'm really against models that say that we all must speak one language and only one language. I think that it does help if we have a lingua franca, a common language, but we can look at supranational organizations that have multiple languages, many like the EU or the AU or the UN, and they're able to function with simultaneous translation, and to actually govern and debate with translation. So I think it's totally possible to do it with people with a set number of languages, maybe not all 2,000 or whatever that are on the earth, but we choose like the top 15 and have translation for those. And I like Esperanto and Globasa. I think these constructed languages are pretty cool. They're interesting. But yeah, I see that as a very like top-down approach in terms of trying to unite everybody by enforcing one language on everybody. Which yeah, I'm not really a big fan of. Yeah, it's a great question. To talk about the anthem. So what language should the anthem be in? I think we can. I just learned this about Spain. So Spain is very much it's a country of nations, you could say. It has a lot of very strong regions that don't necessarily get along with each other or with the central government in Madrid. And what I just recently learned is that the Spanish anthem, national anthem, doesn't have any words because they couldn't agree on anything. So I think that
Okay.
might be the model that we have to go with. And I know that the EU anthem is Ode to Joy, and it's just the music from Beethoven, I believe, if I'm correct, but I'm not a classical music person. Yeah, so I think it could probably just be music. Doesn't need words really.
Okay. And just to touch on the aspect that you said you're not the most representative person to talk about these things, and that they should be decided by a democracy. I still feel that your voice can still influence many people to a side, or to something similar to what you are purporting. So the next question is, what government type do you foresee or will you propose? So for example, there are parliamentary governments, there are semi-presidential where they share executive power between, let's say, the parliament and the president. There are full presidential executives. There are constitutional monarchies such as the UK, one-party systems such as China, or absolute monarchies such as Morocco, for example. So what system would you foresee to be the most likely to be? What would you propose? And like, you can briefly go through all the systems to give the disadvantages and advantages of each.
Oh man,
that's possible.
Yeah.
I hope it's not a lot of work.
That is a lot of work, but yeah, I mean, I don't really want to go through all this because there is a huge diversity as well. I mean, even with federalism, you have different types of federalism. Some with a strong central government, some with a super weak one. So there's really a strong diversity of amongst constitutional monarchies. Some have a constitution written down, and the UK famously doesn't have a written constitution. So I mean, there's really so many tiny differences and also big differences between even what we would call the liberal democracies. Even just focusing on like Western Europe, if you look at just like the 10 countries in Western Europe, they all are quite similar in their governance, but also they have their differences. So it's hard even to generalize amongst countries that are in the same region and have similar systems. I'm passionate about learning about public administration systems and how countries and cities and are governed, really just governance as a whole. I find it extremely fascinating. For a world federation, I don't know. I struggle with this question. I think about it a lot. What would be the perfect system for the globe? I obviously want it to be a democracy, so there's lots of different systems of representation. I'm most familiar with parliamentary and presidential, with representatives sent to a national capital to represent the voices of their constituents. However, there's different models of democracy that we're currently playing with. I mean, you have sortition-based models that an organization called the Global Assembly put into practice actually last year. So they randomly selected people from around the world really from around the world. They put dots randomly on Earth and then found people near those dots to then be a part of this global assembly. So they randomly chose people and then sort of educated them on a topic with experts, and then had them debate issues amongst themselves and deliberate. And so they also combined elements of what's called deliberative democracy, where the people themselves don't necessarily even vote, but they come together and they deliberate and they discuss and they hear different perspectives. And through this process, basically a consensus can be formed without voting. So there's people, political scientists and NGOs are actually putting these different forms of democracy to practice. There's of course liquid democracy, where you can delegate your vote to a representative for a certain issue. Like, let's say that I really like your perspective on the climate, and so I give my vote on everything related to the climate and the environment. I give that to Kennedy. But I really like Andreas's perspective on the economy, so I give all my votes related to the economy to Andreas. And then at any moment, I can take my vote back from anybody, and I can also give all my votes to one person. So if I really like what Sarah has to say, I can give all my votes to Sarah. So that's called liquid democracy. So I'm really fascinated by that as well. And then of course, each one of these systems, representative democracy, deliberative, liquid, sortition-based models, I mean, there's so many. Each one of them can be augmented by or supplemented by e-democracy or digital democracy, where we basically build online digital tools to implement these forms of democracy. And of course, the most common form of democracy when people talk about e-democracy or digital democracy is direct democracy, where the people themselves vote on everything. So personally, I'm fascinated by all these new and innovative forms of democracy and representation. I don't know exactly what a perfect system would look like for the whole globe. I think that there should be a mix, however. So if we had a parliament and representatives, then I also think that there should be something closer to the people. Either a mechanisms for referendum, for the people to put agenda items or policies that we all can vote on parallel to the parliament. So basically the public as a whole, or humanity as a whole, can put forth policies, can suggest policies and vote on them outside of the parliamentary system. I think that's very important. And whether or not it's just a referendum process or it's an actual standing body, like some sort of online public space for all of humanity to discuss and to do things, I think that would be really cool. And that could be alongside a world parliament, if we could have both. But that's just my sort of utopian thinking. I really don't know what the perfect system should be. I would say that I think I brought this up in our last conversation, that whatever we do choose, I think we should be prepared to reform it and reflect on it and change it as time goes on. I don't think that we'll ever have a perfect system and we can carve it into stone, wash our hands, and we're done. We did good work and it's going to work for forever now. I think that's foolish. So whatever we do choose as a species, whatever system of governance we select, we should reflect on it and change it based on our reflections, every 5 to 10 years or something. Yeah, so sorry if that's a long-winded answer. It's a big question.
Okay, so you've touched briefly on my next question, which is about the approach that we can use or we should use to achieve this world state. Should we use a revolutionary approach where everything just happens in one fell sweep, or should we use a gradual approach where we reform and experiment as we go along?
I mean, definitely, I think the experimenting as we go along part, I agree with 100%. But in terms of like building a world federation, I would like it to be as as fast as possible. I'm really not such an incrementalist. I know that it's going to take time anyway, because we're talking about, the largest change the species has ever seen. So it's going to be a big thing, and it's going to take a long time anyway. So that's why I push for change now, and for radical transformational change now. And I would be in favor of it happening all at once. I'd be in favor of a constitutional Congress, where we all come together, with representatives from the nations and from the people and from all different parts of society, global human society, and write a constitution for the earth, and then enforce it. So really sort of all at once it would be my preference, but that's maybe a bit unrealistic. Just a tiny bit unrealistic.
Oh, okay. So let's also okay, let's extend that and also be more unrealistic. So we're living at interesting times where space exploration is becoming cheaper, and even private companies such as SpaceX. I think the company by Bezos. I'm not sure the name. So they're leading the efforts in space exploration. So we might settle other planets in our lifetime. So do you foresee us settling in other planets before building our federation, or are we going to do it through our world state?
I would prefer it to be through a world state. I believe that we should walk into humanity as one united species, or walk into outer space as one united species. But unfortunately, I think that my wishes might be secondary to the wishes of some very rich billionaires in the United States. So I think that those men with their rocket ships, I think they're probably going to go, and they're going to attempt to colonize Mars and other planets and asteroids and things to harness the resources and extract the wealth from faraway planets, and from the labor that they send up there. Elon Musk talked about sending free tickets to Mars. However, you were forever in debt to SpaceX, and you had to work for free to pay off your debt. That's a system of indentured servitude. So I'm really afraid of the extractive economies that we have on Earth, literally being transplanted to other planets. So that's terrible. It's like exporting the worst that we have to offer as a species. People like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, exporting their philosophies to different faraway planets it's backwards. So I'm really not in favor of that. However, these people have more money than many countries, and they're more powerful than many countries, and at a certain point there's no one to stop them, which is part of a big reason why we need a World Federation to structure and to regulate how we go into space, and to protect the labor and the resources that are involved in this. Because once you're up there on a spaceship and it's just you and the company, and there's no government to protect you, there's no labor oversight, no safety inspection, no police to go to if your boss hits you. You're just beholden to you and the company. It's pure capitalism or mercantilism, really, at that point. So I'm really afraid. And I'm really afraid of what happens to the people who get inspired and are really excited to go to these faraway planets and then end up just being exploited by a corporation. So I'm afraid of that.
And how can we mitigate that? Or how can that be resolved?
I mean, I guess we would need a World Federation. Like I said, we need some sort of enforceable a body that can enforce the space treaties and to oversee how these multinational corporations go into outer space, to add some structure and to oversight to it, and to enforce human rights wherever humans are, not just here on Earth, but also in outer space. Yeah, so that's what I would say. And there's a lot of treaties that govern outer space, and similar to treaties that govern human rights or the environment, nation states and multinational corporations, well, they ignore them. They look at them as just useless pieces of paper. So what we need when it comes to treaties that govern outer space and the climate and human rights, we need enforceable world law. We need to be able to enforce these treaties, and ideally draft world law in a democratic manner, and enforce those world laws as well. So I guess that's how I would say you can solve it. Without that, I have no idea how you would solve this. It's another one of these global problems that we cannot really address without a world federation.
Okay. And then another concept of federation is it's a mix of diversity and unity. So when we create a federal state, there's a lot of politics that's going to be involved. And obviously, the majority are going to have a lot of say in what is going to be done. So how can we safeguard the rights of minority groups and especially preserve cultures that are almost going extinct?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that there's some basics. So legally protecting groups is very important. All minority, minority language groups, minority ethnic groups, minority political groups, basically all minorities that so that we make sure that it's not just a rule of the majority, that the majority doesn't just force their will onto smaller groups. So legal protections, and then I'd say economic support. I think we can do things like providing money for, like, let's take a minority language, for example. We could build schools and hire teachers to teach this language in a region where it's historically been spoken. So money is a great thing to help protect and preserve these cultures. And then educating the majority, I think, is really key. So really making sure that the majority of the world population is aware of just how diverse we all are, and that there's this group of people and they're only 600,000 people, but they have a very rich and diverse culture, and they've been doing these things for thousands of years, and so on and so forth. I think it's really important that we all become more aware that these groups exist and how beautiful they are and how beautiful their cultures are. So that's really important. I think educating the majority about it is arguably the most important part about it, because then eventually that leads into the sense of global citizenship, which is key. And so if we all see ourselves as global citizens, and we recognize that means being part of a multi-layered fabric of human society, then in theory that should prevent any sort of damaging action than the majority may want to take. But of course, then you have legal and economic protection as well.
Yeah, now that you've talked about education, are you a humanist? And if so, how can we educate people about these humanist values?
I'm primarily a world federalist. That's the one ism that I strongly agree and identify with. However, I do believe in humanist philosophy, and I was actually one of the first sort of ideologies that I came into contact with. I wasn't raised particularly religious by my own family, and so humanism was something that my parents didn't teach it to me. I saw it, I learned about it, and understood it to be a sort of secular alternative to religion. So I like that, and I like the ethical values, believing that you can have sort of universal ethics that don't have to come down from God or from a holy book. I like that. I like those ideas. But I quickly became more of a humanitarian and believed and really got into humanitarian values and beliefs, which then led me to world federalism. So like I said, I primarily believe in world federalism, and I think that most of the good bits of humanism are also in world federalism.
Oh, okay. So to prevent the World Federation from becoming an ivory tower, what steps should we take?
Well, it already is, I would say. It's already pretty, I mean, I guess we're trying to diversify it, but it's a very small group of people. I don't know if I would say that all those people are on the ivory tower, but it's at least a very small group of people. Do you mean the world, like the movement for world federalism, or like the World Federation itself? Maybe I should clarify.
Yeah, you can. My question is intended for the world state, but you can also
Okay.
talk about the movement itself.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the movement, I guess it's less relevant, I guess. Yeah, for the movement, I would just say, try to grow and to get as many people involved as possible. We should be very inclusive of everybody, which I think we are. I think World Federalists inherently are pretty welcoming and inclusive people. Yeah. But in terms of the world state, that's a little bit more difficult. The state itself has a way of sort of insulating itself from the rest of society and developing schools for bureaucrats and for the children of bureaucrats, and sort of, separating itself. We can see that a lot with the EU. I'd say the EU is run largely by this sort of European technocratic elite that isn't really connected to the European public at all. And that's no fault of these people. I think they're really nice people and they mean really well and they really believe in Europe, but it's still an ivory tower. And so you need to have economic pathways and pathways for regular people and the children of not professors, but of the children of workers to be able to govern at a supranational level. And so I think that there's policies that you can implement, like quotas or programs that really elevate young people that don't necessarily come from privileged backgrounds, come from underprivileged backgrounds, elevate them and sponsor them and give them positions in governance is really important. And that also helps with the democratic legitimacy. Because what I just described with the European Union, for example, that it's a technocratic elite that's removed from the rest of the European public, well, that's a massive critique of the Eurosceptics, the people who want the European Union to go away. They point this out and say, look, it doesn't even represent us. It's not democratic. We should get rid of it. So it's very important that we, from the very beginning, avoid this problem and have a very representative system of governance in which people from all different walks of life are represented in the bureaucracy, in the halls of power, and so on and so forth. I think it's very important.
Yeah, and related to that is for us to create a world state, we need to have an external threat that can bring people together. I think that's a very useful approach to bring people together. When you show them that you have this external threat, that threat might be climate change, but there are a lot of skeptics. Then it doesn't really impact people directly. Then how do we show people this external threat? How do we make it like reach the? How do we make people relate to this?
Yeah, it's hard. And I mean, that's a task of political movements the world over. And historically speaking, it's been a massive challenge for political movements to get people to realize a common enemy or a threat, and to band together and to join and donate their time and their money to a cause. It's really difficult. And you can look at climate change. It's probably the biggest and best example that we have right now. And there is a massive movement of climate activists that are pushing regular people and policymakers and everybody in between, to recognize the climate crisis as an existential common threat, a common enemy that we all face that could destroy life as we know it. And yet you also see people that push back on that, or they view the climate crisis through a nationalist lens, or see it as a benefit for their nation. Countries like Russia actually have a lot to gain from warming. The permafrost in Siberia will melt, and they will have a lot of agriculture land that they don't have now, and trade routes in the Arctic. China is building trade ports in northern Russia. So, I mean, you can say that these sort of nationalist perspectives on this issue of the climate crisis are actually going in the wrong direction. So at the same time, you also have all these climate activists in other countries that are trying to do something, that are saying, hey, we all need to come together and to see this as a common threat and to do something together. So even the UN, climate change conference or COP, the Conference of Parties, they struggle to get all on the same page about this. And so I obviously don't have the answer here. I mean, there's literally thousands of people trying to solve this problem. It's extremely difficult. You have videos and movies being made, you have memes, you have articles and academic journals. And I mean, there's so many different ways to tell people, hey, we should do something about this problem, and we all need to do something together. You can make that message in many different forms. You can do that on TikTok or in an academic journal or in a documentary. It's the same message. And we got to keep talking about it and keep pushing for it. But at the end of the day, some people just don't want to listen. So it's extremely difficult. And that's just one issue. Everything I've just described is also applicable to other global issues like human rights abuses or space travel, war and peace, nuclear weapons. All of these issues face the very same problem that we have with the climate change crisis.
And my final question is, how should the world military look like?
Oh man, good question. In theory, I wouldn't want it to have one. I really am. I'm pretty strong pacifist, and I'd like all military budgets around the world to go towards education and infrastructure and healthcare. I'd prefer if militaries were more like civil protection thing, disaster relief or climate change mitigation organizations. We're going to have mass flooding and drought and mass migration. So we're going to need a lot of heavy machinery and strong people to help with all these problems, building dikes, building roads, building houses. We have big things that we need to build. And I would say that it'd be great if we could repurpose the militaries around the world to help with these crises, rather than cause more of them by bombing civilians in the Ukraine, for example, or Yemen. That's my position. But if we do need some sort of global military, I guess it would serve some sort of peacekeeping function. But that's much closer to a police force anyway. So I don't even know. I mean, we could call it a military, but if its role is to go between people that are fighting and to separate them, I see that as a police action. So I think I'm more in favor of like a world police, I guess, and a civil protection agency. I don't really see the need for us to build like spaceships with massive guns to go into outer space. Seems like a big waste of resources, in my humble opinion.
Okay, so those were the questions I had, but just before we conclude, allow me to make extensions and derivatives from what you have spoken. So regarding the last point of the world military, I'll use the example of the United States. Before they had the United States, they had the Confederate government, and it didn't have its own military. The states themselves were the ones who donated the military to the Confederate government, and that didn't work for them. That's why they had to ratify their constitution to centralize power and to centralize defense, basically. The same thing is affecting the United Nations, which is what we like this the closest thing that we have to a world state. Many countries are not fulfilling their peacekeeping obligations. They're not sending troops, or they're not sending enough troops. So that's a very big issue. So should the world state have its own military, or should it rely on its members for the peacekeeping forces?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, was that a question at me?
Yeah, I just wanted your perspective on it. Which will work best, for the world state to have its own military, or for it to rely on states to send troops when there's a crisis?
Well, we have that now with the peacekeepers. The peacekeepers are currently still members of their national government or their national military, and so the UN peacekeeping system relies on the states to send troops or soldiers to the UN peacekeeping missions. So if no member state of the United Nations contributes soldiers to a UN peacekeeping mission, then there will be no soldiers in that UN peacekeeping mission. So it relies on the member states to send soldiers. And they do so mostly out of for political reasons, to make themselves look good, or for regional, or for their own security. Yeah. So I guess it would be nice to have a standing peacekeeping force. Again, very similar. I would just see that, even if they look like soldiers and dress like soldiers, I see UN peacekeeping as a largely a police action. It's not really a military type thing, but I guess that's more of an academic debate. To answer your question, I do think that a standing UN peacekeeping force that could rapidly respond to issues and to conflicts would be valuable, and especially if it was beholden, or if it listened to the World Parliament or the global democracy, and not the member states. That would be ideal.
Okay. So allow me to also make a derivative argument from the question I asked about the World Federation becoming an ivory tower. So I want to pose to you a counterfactual, where the world state is actually not an ivory tower. It's actually overbearing. It's actually dominating states. It's actually committing atrocities towards civilians. So how, and given that we only have one planet, is there a clause, or like an escape clause? For example, I live in Kenya, and if the Kenyan government commits atrocities, or persecutes me politically, I have the option of fleeing Kenya and go to another country. If that happens in a world state, you cannot leave this world. So where do you go to? Where do you seek asylum?
Yeah. I see your argument about Kenya and being persecuted in Kenya and fleeing, and a lot of people do flee when they're persecuted. I think we can look to the Syrian civil war as a pretty good example of millions of people fleeing a country that was persecuting and murdering them, fleeing a government that was murdering them. However, the people that were fleeing were the well-off and the educated, the people who had money to pay someone to smuggle them across multiple international borders, and had usually a profession to get all that money in the first place. So unfortunately for many people around the world, when a government persecutes them and even begins killing them, they might not have the means to escape and to simply go across. They might not have a passport. They might not have the money to travel. or the language abilities to get out of their village or speak even the national language. If like bringing up minority language groups, maybe they don't even speak the language of their nation, that they can even get around and leave their own nation. So, I mean, to assume that everybody on earth right now has the ability to escape a government that's persecuting them is just a complete fallacy. Many people are trapped in their country, especially when their government wants to trap them. Removing passports, not giving the rights to travel. I mean, there's many different ways where a government, if it wants to oppress its people, restricting their freedom of movement is one of the first things that happens. So I really just don't. Yeah. So that is I think I hear that argument a lot from people that, what do we right now? We can just simply hop across borders. And that's just really not even really the case. So will that problem persist in a global system with a World Federation? Then yeah, I would say so. If the World Federation became tyrannical, yes, it would be terrible. And I don't know how we would escape it, because it would be a world state. I mean, it's pretty obvious. There's no way to escape an oppressive world state. I mean, I can't sit here and pretend that there's like a secret back door to the moon or something. I don't know. No. Excuse me. In theory, we need to build a system that doesn't happen, right? We need checks and balances and strong institutions and a strong sense of duty amongst our bureaucrats and amongst our standing peacekeeping army. Maybe they can protect us if the tyrannical dictator gets out of control. I mean, who knows? You need strong institutions, you need the rule of law, you need rights, you need to do these things to protect the people. But I think the risk of some sort of tyrannical world state far outweighs the benefits of a beneficial world state that would help us solve global challenges. So of course, whenever we talk about change, whenever we talk about transformation, we're also talking about sacrifice. So yes, in a world state, we would sacrifice this utopian right that we have to simply walk across borders, because it's super easy to travel to another country when your government is oppressing you. Yeah, we would sacrifice that. We would sacrifice that. I admit that. But we would gain, ideally, a competent government that could help solve global challenges and protect human rights. Because what we have right now is also a bunch of nation states and a bunch of multinational corporations that oppress people and extract resources from around the world and basically have people as slaves, and they can't leave, and they work in a mine and they get chemicals all over their skin, and it's terrible existence. And that's what we have right now. And so, yeah, I'm willing to sacrifice this dream that, to simply travel to another country when things get hard in order to protect the people that live an extremely difficult life right now.
And okay, let me pose a question about the forms of governance. We advancing technologically. There are new forms of artificial intelligence. Virtual reality is a thing. Artificial reality. So these are unexplored territories that have so many prospects. So if we were to create a new government, would it be an alternate reality to the governments that we already have, or do you foresee the intrusion of government, like the government imposing itself on these new forms, so that the two are not exclusive? They're basically the same thing. The government that controls you physically is the same government that controls you in a virtual world. Or can we create? Is it an opportunity for us to create this world state through a virtual platform that is alternate to the what we have?
That's a great question. It's a few different questions, I would say. So I mean, I think that it is possible to use virtual reality to our advantage when it comes to building a global democracy. I'm actually aware of an organization called VR Democracy. They're based in Australia, and they build democratic spaces in virtual reality, like parliaments and debating rooms and things like that. Um, the problem is that no, very few people go to these virtual spaces. But it is already there. I mean, you can go into virtual reality and start debating with people and start having democratic discussions, and then you can all vote. You can raise your hand and vote, and that's democracy. How much authority this all have is obviously not that much right now, but it's the start. It could be the start of something. So what I mean to say is that I do think virtual reality could have a role to play, and I'm fascinated by it. But addressing your question of, would the government have control in a virtual space, I would say yes, 100%. We have digital spaces now that aren't that different technically from a virtual space, like a Discord server or a Facebook group. It's just a text-based version of a virtual 3D space. Functionally, when you're chatting with somebody in a Facebook group, it's the same sort of thing as talking to somebody in virtual reality. The medium is just different. But in terms of how the government is able to control that, it's the same way they control a Facebook group. So in oppressive dictatorships, they can turn the internet off, or they can hire thousands of people to moderate and control, or they can have algorithms that are let loose on these platforms to control for words like, president bad, and then they can filter that out and select people and put them in jail. So yes, I believe that the government could do everything it does now to control and moderate and use the internet as a weapon against the people. Everything that governments do today can also happen in the virtual reality space in the future. It might take a little bit of time for them to develop these tools, but it will happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've brought the aspect of these virtual spaces, but this can be controlled by the government. So let's discuss about these other forms of technology that are diffusing power from state governments. So an example I can use is blockchain, and especially Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a currency that like people use to buy goods and services. It's a real coin. So you cannot dispute that it's not real money. It's not virtual, it's real money. So it's just one aspect of what the government does. The government prints currency, and then we have this blockchain currency that is decentralized. It's not owned by anyone. It cannot be managed by anyone. So and we extend that to anything. So let's say defense. We can have decentralized defense where we're using drones, and then we're just creating a referendum of where to send these drones or something similar to that. So all these aspects of the government can be decentralized using technology. So is it practical? Is it something that can work? What are the prospects and the challenges that pertain to these applications?
Yeah, I think what you bring up with this decentralized governance model, especially going right into the defense, I think that's very interesting. And I'd like to learn more about it. I think it's very fascinating to think of how a decentralized and sort of tech-based government or state really would function. I think it's really an interesting exercise. In terms of blockchain technology and Bitcoin, I know that it's perceived to be this sort of democratizer, I guess, but I know that also with Bitcoin specifically, and with a lot of the coins, it does rely on a group of people to mine the coin. And to mine Bitcoin, you need a lot of power, like electricity. You need lots of servers, which are expensive, electricity, cooling, air conditioning, because the servers get hot. So the electricity is extremely expensive to mine Bitcoin. The space to house the servers and the air conditioning units is also quite expensive. I mean, unless you have a house or a garage or a large space where you can do this. So what I mean to say is that not everybody can just mine Bitcoin. You need to have some money to even get into it. We can all buy it. You know, if you have a bank account, you can buy Bitcoin at the rate that it's worth right now. But to actually create new Bitcoin, to make the pie bigger. So you can buy your slice of the pie, but to make the pie bigger, it's actually a small group of people who have the power to do that. And it actually gets smaller because apparently it's harder to mine as time goes on. You need more energy and servers and infrastructure to mine Bitcoin than what you did in the past. So it's even getting harder and harder to get into that. As far as I know, I'm really not an expert on the topic. So I mean, I describe all that to say that it's not necessarily very democratic. It's not some great equalizer. It is a financial product at the end of the day, and it's a very risky one. Bitcoin just dropped dramatically. So anybody who had their money in there lost a lot of money. So it's a very risky financial product. Again, not everybody has the disposable income to invest in risky financial products. Usually people who can do that already have wealth and money, and they're comfortable enough investing in something that may fail. As Bitcoin, it didn't fail, but it went down a lot. And so that also shows you that the people who buy Bitcoin and the people who mine Bitcoin usually have a lot of resources to begin with. So I really push back against any notion that it's somehow going to democratize finance or something like that. It's more, it might have made more people get involved in finance than were involved before. But the people who are involved are generally still pretty well off people. They have money, especially when you think about in comparison or relative to the global population. Yeah, so that's sort of but I want to go back to what you were describing with the sort of decentralized government. I think that's extremely fascinating. I haven't heard anything like that before, especially with defense and with like drones, that the public decides where to send the drones. And you can think about healthcare and education, or really just budgets. You know, if we had a budget, perhaps we could use blockchain technology for a national budget, and then a sort of online global democracy to vote, you know, where the money should go to, where to allocate funds. It's very similar to direct democracy at that point, but you could use blockchain to secure it and to verify it and things like that. So it's an interesting idea. It's fun stuff to learn about. I'm really, again, not an expert on the topic, so I hardly know what I'm talking about when it comes to this sort of thing.
No worries. But it also, you've mentioned the idea of a liquid democracy, where it has both aspects of direct democracy, which technology can play a very big role, and indirect democracy, where technology cannot work. So my final question is, during the crisis that we have right now, we've seen citizens become more involved than they were before. There's a group of hackers called Anonymous that actually hacked Russian systems, and they released a lot of information. We see that governments are compromised, that if they're not transparent, someone can just hack into their servers and release all that information. So people are becoming more involved in world affairs, even donating their money, for example, to Ukraine. So is this a trend that's going to persist, in your opinion, or is it just an anomaly, something that's going to die?
I think it will increase. sort of like hacktivism and stuff like that, I think will increase as much as nation states try to stop it. And generally activism in general, people donating to Ukraine and getting involved in the Ukraine crisis and war. I think it's great to see. I mean, not the war, but the people getting involved to do something about it, to address it, to help the people who are caught in the middle of this. That's really nice to see people help. But yeah, I think that always, I think it's a sort of a common reaction when you have a crisis and people feel attached to it. I think you do see more political activism when you have a crisis. So I think as more and more crises sort of stack on top of each other, Europe is going to have an energy crisis, it looks like, in winter. And then we'll have the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the war, of course, the multiple wars around the world, one in Europe, several in other places. So I think as these crises sort of overlap and compound on each other, it will push more people to get involved and to call and demand for change. So as much as I hate to see all these crises, I think it's terrible, the place that we've brought ourselves as a human species. I do think that we need that, and we need people to get angry and to see that they have a voice in this, and that they can do something about it by rising up and standing up and calling for change and helping each other. I think that's what we need when we talk about building a movement for World Federation. So we as World Federalists need to be there. We need to be helping. We need to be engaged with other political movements. We shouldn't say, oh, because this is a climate meeting or a climate protest, I shouldn't be there because I'm a World Federalist. That's wrong. We should be involved in all these causes because they're all global issues, and World Federalism has something to say. And not only that, but we should have solidarity with these other causes as well. So we need to be there, and we need to sort of talk to people and get them to realize that this isn't just a climate crisis. It's not just a war. It's not just this one bad company or this one bad country. This is a systemic problem. It's an institutional, structural problem that has to do with the way our world is governed.
Yeah, I think now that they've given that call to action, that's a very good way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kennedy.
Yeah, I hope I will continue this discussion.
Yeah, me too.